afternoon, and today I'm going to talk about one of the most famous works of ancient Egyptian literature, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Now, here it is in a paperback edition published by, Arcturus Holdings Limited, Arcturus Publications of London, and it's a republication of Wallis Budge's, E.A. Wallis Budge's publication, book on it, and translation. Now, the Book of the Dead is a collection of spells, incantations, hymns, and passwords, which were inscribed on, on shrouds around which mummies were wrapped, and they were supposed to help the deceased get through the numerous obstacles in the afterlife, so that he could eventually get to the field of reeds, which was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of the Elysian fields. And during his journey, he identified with the god of the dead, Osiris. He went to be judged in their great hall of the dead, where, among other things, his heart was weighed against the feather. The feather represented truth and justice, and the natural right order that pervaded the universe, Ma'at. And if you failed this test, you were fed to a creature that was part lion, part hippo, and I think part crocodile. And then onwards, there are numerous hymns to the various gods. The deceased had to pass through various regions of the underworld and various stations, and say various things to the gods there in order to get them to let him pass. At the same time, there are hymns there to the various gods, like Ra, Horus, and so on, so that the deceased, after he had passed through these gates and portals, he would be able to accompany Ra, the sun god, on his great ship as he sailed through the sky, and then sailed through the 12 hours of the night, fighting the creatures like the Apep serpent that sought to prevent Ra from passing through the underworld and then rising again in the morning. There were also spells so that the deceased could regain control of various of his organs, like his head and his legs. And also, there's also something in there called the negative confession, which is where the deceased says, "I have not done various sins and taboo acts." Like, he will say he hasn't, he hasn't told lies, he hasn't despoiled temples of the food offerings to the gods, and he hasn't eaten anything abominable. And it goes on like that. There are also spells to allow, and passwords to allow, the spirit of the deceased to leave the tomb during the daytime. It's quite interesting, because in ancient Egyptian religion, it was in the daytime where the spirits came out to have a look to see what was going on in the world of the living, and then at night they returned to the tomb, which is rather different from Western culture, where ghosts are believed to leave their tombs in the night time and haunt us, but then disappear at daybreak, right? And it's this aspect of the Book of the Dead gave it its name, which is in ancient Egyptian, it was known as the Book of Going Forth by Day. And there are also several spells in there which allow the deceased to turn into various animals like hares and the lotus plant. These texts were written in tombs and again buried with the deceased along with various amulets for protection. There are several versions available. Some of them are very, very long, like the longest is 23.4 meters or so. So very long indeed. Wallis Budge's version came from the scribe Annie, and that's got, I think, 60 chapters in it. I can't remember. I mean, again, it's quite a long work. Now, I thought I'd speak about it because not only is this one of the most important and most well-known pieces of ancient Egyptian literature, it's also been misrepresented by one of the Afrocentric writers. I was reading a little while ago that one of them claimed that one of the great ancient Greek philosophers, either Plato or Aristotle, plagiarised the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. This is absolutely false. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is a profoundly religious work. There's a lot of references to the ancient Egyptian mythology, as you'd expect. I mean, it talks about the war between Horus and Set, the gods subduing the sons of impotent rebellion, which is presumably these gods who rose up with Set against the right rule of the gods. The birth of one of the sun gods, I think Amun, possibly, from an egg right at the beginning of the world. And the passage of Ra through the sky on his boat, celestial boat. Yeah, all that stuff. It is not a philosophical text, and it is certainly not what we would understand as a scientific text, although, as we know, the ancient Egyptians were no slouches at medicine, and they were certainly no slouches at mathematics. But this is not one of those texts. For example, and the Greek texts are quite different. For example, if you can pick up editions of Plato quite cheaply. They were in Penguin Classics, which published the Socratic dialogues, also Plato's Laws, and other books like Thaetaetus, as well as the works of Aristotle. Now, the ancient Greek works tend to be presented as a monograph, that is, they're a single text. They're the work of rational observation and deduction. They're not religious, although some of them can move in those directions. And many of them are written as dialogues. I mean, if you look at the last days of Socrates, it's well, some of them is apologies, his own apologies. There's the work Euthyphro is a dialogue between Socrates and Euthyphro. As it says, they're written almost as plays. And Socrates in Plato and Plato in Socrates, they discuss things like the nature of the state and justice and so on. The Plato's Thaetaetus is something like a proto-scientific text where Plato lays out his theory of the origins of the universe and the construction of the human body. And Plato believed that there was this transcendent being, this called the demiurge, which in ancient Greek means something like the worker, who observed the transcendent forms Plato believed existed in eternity and which were the intelligible but transcendent models of earthly objects like dogs, cats, whatever. The demiurge observed these and then created the world and these objects through a mixture of separation and difference and similarity, and by producing these things and molding them together in the right quantities, the demiurge created the universe and its objects. He also believed he was an atomist, because atomists believe things, after like Democritus, believed things happened by chance. It was through chance that the atoms falling through the universe got stuck together in various forms, and various animals were created, and plants and whatever objects. And those those creatures that did not fit, were not fitted for survival, died out. While those creatures that worked continued. When Darwin's Origin of Species came out, one of the people who read it, one of the aristocrats and aristocratic literary types, said that it was all in the ancient Greeks and Romans. There wasn't that much difference. Obviously there was, because Darwin was a modern biologist and so knew much more, but the same basic principle was the same. However, Plato developed a theory like atoms, which was also under divine, which he considered to be also under divine control. So there is a reconciliation or a mixture of atomism and religion, and he also talks about the structure of the human body, which is quite remarkable now. I mean, some of it is very wrong by he talks about the limbs move because of the sinews and the muscles are just padding, and as in later times and in the other civilizations, the heart is the center of understanding, not the brain. And he has this theory that the brain is there to cool the blood or something. It's very, very peculiar. Now, Thaetaetus is clearly one of the key texts to understanding the Platonic idea of reality and the universe, and the ancient Greek, I think, biology at that time. But as you can see, it's very, very different from the Book of the Dead. And for an Afrocentrist to say that the ancient Greeks plagiarized the Book of the Dead is nonsense. I think you have to be either deluded or lying, to say it. But the Book of the Dead is well worth reading if you have an interest in ancient Egypt and their civilization and their religion, which obviously still continues to fascinate. Plato and Aristotle are still fundamentally important, even in Western philosophy. Aristotle especially, he covers things like ethics, aesthetics, biology, and politics. But ancient Egypt and ancient Greece are very, very different. The ancient Greeks, the ancient Greeks often said that their great thinkers took their ideas from ancient Egypt, partly as a way of making them respectable, because there was such cachet of ancient Egyptian civilization. But when we examine the ancient Greek ideas, and the ancient Egyptians, they're very, very different. And the ancient Greeks did not plagiarize the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Thank you, and thanks very much for watching.